Let me begin by saying to you that I know I'm going to go over a little bit. If you have a Super Bowl party to go to, just quietly walk out. There's no walk of shame here. The setting is a Southern Baptist Sunday school classroom in Savannah, Georgia. The year is around 1970. I am 7 years old, approximately. We 10 or so children are in chairs in a semicircle facing the Sunday school teacher. The lesson that day had been about creation, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the evidence for which was left on the felt board on an easel. God created everything in 7 literal days. The teacher is called out of the room for a few minutes. We children sat in silence. I can't believe that 10 children would sit in silence nowadays, but in 1970 we did. I had fidgeted throughout the lesson on Adam and Eve. I had a question that needed to come out, and even though I was normally shy at that age, I broke the silence with the other children, looked around the room at them and asked, "Do y'all really believe all this?" They looked at me strangely, and all of them nodded, yes. I knew then that the faith that I was being brought up in would not be my final resting place in my spiritual journey. I grew up in an unusual household for someone attending a Christian fundamentalist church. Both of my parents were interested in science. My father had a degree in marine biology. They believed in weighing evidence, and my father's cooking, more than anything else, always resembled a lab experiment. My parents gave me the Time Life Nature Science series for Christmas. They were lavishly illustrated books on scientific subjects. I loved them all. 2 of my favorite volumes were entitled Evolution and Human Origins. Both volumes were based upon Darwin's theory of evolution and showed the material evidence that demonstrates that life on Earth is descended from previous forms, and that included human life. In my childhood, I was confused about evolution and creation. My parents believed in evolution, yet they took me to a church that condemned their secret beliefs. I did not know what to make of it. Perhaps a similar moment occurred in your life as well, one that called you to question of religious versus a scientific explanation of the universe and our role in it. It seemed that a conflict existed between science and religion, even when I was 6 or 7 years old. That conflict also arose in the mind of Charles Darwin. One might imagine that Darwin doubted the existence of God based upon his theory of evolution that does not hold that all life was created by a deity, or rather, does not mention the creation story of Genesis. The conflict between science and religion over the literal interpretation of the creation story found in the Bible on one hand, and the random non-theological account of life developing from previous life over time is still with us. In 2005, the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life released the results of a public opinion poll that showed nearly 2/3 of Americans want both creationism to be taught along with evolution in the public schools. Only 48% then accepted any form of evolution, and just 26% accepted Darwin's theory of evolution by means of natural selection. That's right, only 26% at that time. Fully 42% said that all living beings, including humans, have existed in their present form since the beginning of time. That's from Sue Jacoby's The Age of American Unreason. Though this information is almost 15 to 20 years old, amazingly, much research is still being done on American religion. Very little is done about religion and evolution nowadays. The Scopes trial, a century past next year, is still being fought in the courts and ballot boxes in this nation. Only 18 years ago, the Dover, Pennsylvania school district approved a statement implying that intelligent design should be taught in the public schools. The courts overruled that decision. And the Dover School Board was rejected by the voters when they came up to re-election. This reveals the conflict among us about evolution. There are still many people who believe in a literal interpretation of Genesis. For some, learning about the theory of evolution might cause them to doubt their deepest faith in God. That was not the case for Charles Darwin immediately. Darwin's doubt in God did not derive from his theory of evolution. His doubt was based upon conflict between observation of the natural world and his own concept of the nature of God. Through his father Robert, though his father Robert was a Unitarian and a free thinker, Charles was baptized as an Anglican. His father continued to be a Unitarian nominally. He really didn't go to church at all. Charles Darwin attended Unitarian churches with his mother as a child. Darwin's father sent him to the University of Edinburgh to study medicine. Being a man of some means, Robert Darwin might have asked his son what he wanted to study. Charles was interested in anatomy and science, but he had no interest in medicine and became distressed when watching surgeries. Charles Darwin's poor studies aggravated his father, so he removed him from the University of Edinburgh and sent him to Oxford University to study to become an Anglican priest. Because he was baptized in the Anglican faith, Darwin could attend Oxford University, which was not open to non-Anglicans until 1870. There, Charles Darwin again neglected his studies. He was more interested in hunting and other pursuits at the time. The interesting aspect of this was that his interest in natural science would not have been unusual for Anglican clergy in those days. Some of the natural scientists in England in those days were Anglican priests. Darwin's later loss of faith occurred not by scientific reasoning, but by moral crisis in observing the natural world. Prior to age 40, Darwin believed in a benevolent deity, creator of the earth, and that the earth was a reflection of God's design. Darwin's observation of the natural world shook his moral sensibility. He wrote in a letter, "I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. There seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a benevolent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae, wasp, with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice." The matter in Darwin's mind was not science, but theology and morality. He believed that the natural world was constructed by God. What kind of deity, though, would construct such a cruel system? Darwin's loss of faith was in the liberal Christian God that he had been taught about in the Unitarian church of his childhood. He could not believe in God because he perceived the world as far too cruel to be created by any loving deity. British Unitarians in Darwin's time believed in a loving and just God. They believed that Jesus understood God uniquely and could perform miracles, not just because Jesus was the little Son of God, but because God gave him the power to demonstrate his preaching through supernatural acts that demonstrated God's favor. Unitarians believed that the God Jesus believed in was a being who loved all people with mercy and kindness, and that the world reflected God's love. This view of God conflicted with Darwin's observation. Darwin's theological observation does have some validity. The natural world is not a kind place. The process of evolution is a process of species dying out while others come into being through random mutation and other factors. Survival and the propagation of descendants is the only measure of a species' success. The process of evolution is often brutal. Perhaps this point of view is based upon a flawed understanding of God. In non-fundamentalist religious circles, Darwin's theory of evolution is less of an issue. Some people believe that evolution is the way that God works, as cruel and painful as it is. One such person was Pope John Paul II. In 1996, he gave an address to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in which he stated, "New knowledge," this is 1996, "new knowledge leads us to recognize in the theory of evolution more than a hypothesis." When pressed by journalists later, a Vatican spokesman stated that the Pope believed in Darwinian evolution. So does the current Pope, Francis. So far, no one has adequately reconciled this belief in a benevolent deity with a world that Darwin described as miserable. A few years ago, I read a paper by Elizabeth Johnson, a Roman Catholic nun and Fordham University professor of theology, in which she attempted to reconcile evolution and her Christian faith. She praised evolution as a process that God originates. She writes, "The Creator embraces the chanciness of random mutations, being the source not just of mutation, but of disruption that causes change to happen in the first place." The problem with this theological premise is that it presents a benevolent deity as the author of the evolutionary process, a process that its discoverer, Darwin, found cruel. Johnson does not adequately address this contradiction in the nature of the world and in the nature of God and her theology. This is not meant to be a taking of sides between theologians who support evolutionary theory and scientists who doubt religious truths. This is to demonstrate that the understanding of God and nature are not a finished project, but a work in process. We as Unitarian Universalists have been involved in that journey from the time that The Origin of Species was published in 1859. Some of us only see science revealing a random, godless universe. Others believe that Darwinian evolution is true, but also believe in some way that a benevolent deity also exists. There are maybe other points of view among us. After all, if you bring two Unitarian Universalists together, you find that there are at least 5 opinions. Religion, though, has a calling to Darwinian evolution. Religion might be a response to evolution in a subconscious way. It is difficult to talk about religion without specific beliefs, doctrines, tenets, metaphysics, but to go forward, we might need to think about religion differently. Perhaps religion and philosophy came into being to counteract the behavioral effects of evolution. Most of the world religions today came about during the period between 2000 BC and 700 AD. This period was the time in the world when civilization spread and new technologies were found and social organization became widespread throughout much of the world. These major world religions came about because intelligent, spiritually centered prophets, philosophers, messiahs, and communities of faith realized that the forces that had brought about human existence, power, lust, greed, competition, war, exploitation, were not the things that would take humanity to the next level of its existence if humanity were to thrive. Instead of thinking about the doctrines or tenets of specific religions, consider what religion and philosophy were intended to do by their founders. Some of the things that religion and philosophy encourage include pacifism, connection, clarity of thought, compassion. These are impulses contrary to evolution. Religion and philosophy might have come about to lift humanity out of the thinking that human origins had programmed into us and to point the path forward. Apply this idea to humanity, religion and philosophy might be saying the evolutionary behaviors that led to humanity won't get humanity to the next level of consciousness. Yes, it might be countered that religion and philosophy have also been the source of those negative behaviors in humans. Perhaps the source of religiously and philosophically based negative behaviors in human history is the result of adherents not following the original faith. For example, Jesus was a pacifist, and for the first century of its existence, Christianity was a pacifist religion. The same could be said of Buddha and Buddhism. Societies ignored the central tenets of religious and philosophical beliefs to follow more evolutionary behaviors. For all this negative, evolutionary-based behavior, religion and philosophy call us to the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln put it. One of the distinct aspects of world religions and philosophies is that their founders believed that human beings could find the good in and among themselves. In their times, they believed that humans were little lower than angels, and that the kingdom of heaven is among us. They believed in savage times that human beings had the capacity to be so much more than they were. Charles Darwin believed in a 19th century Unitarian God. He believed that the God he learned about in the Unitarian Church was the only one that could be. He could imagine no other possibility. When he witnessed cruelty in the natural order, Darwin rejected the faith of his childhood, but did not conceive that God or goddess might be understood differently. Darwin's faith bears witness to something that is real among us in the 21st century. Many Unitarian Universalists have rejected the idea of God they were taught in one particular faith tradition, without examining the possibility that God might be conceivable in another way. One of the strengths of our religious movement, as we understand it now, is that our spiritual exploration and community can offer us many perspectives. We are not given only one possibility for a belief, and are encouraged to explore for personal growth and life. Charles Darwin was not a theologian. He was a scientist whose discovery opened religious thought to new ideas and challenged our assumptions. Regardless of how some might feel about his discovery, he changed us. He changed the world. This is Evolution Weekend, the weekend close to Darwin's birthday. Darwin took strength despite the conflict and pain that the process of evolution caused, that life was connected. In the 6th edition and 3rd edition of the Norton publication of The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, Darwin presents his belief that life was connected. In this reflection, let us end with Darwin's own words. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms, or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone circling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.